When Germany surrendered on the 8th of May, 1945, the most feared machine of the Second World War fell silent. The Tiger tank, 60 tons of steel that had terrorized Allied crews from North Africa to the gates of Berlin, now sat abandoned in ditches, forests, and shattered city streets across a devastated continent. Over 1,300 Tiger I tanks and nearly 500 of their even more formidable successors, the Tiger II, had been built. Yet within months of victory, this legendary weapon would all but vanish. What came next was a frantic intelligence scramble, an unprecedented destruction campaign, and a technological legacy that would reshape armored warfare forever. This is what happened to the Tiger tanks after the war ended. The Tiger had earned its fearsome reputation through brutal efficiency. Its 88mm gun could eliminate a Sherman tank from distances exceeding 3,600 yards, well beyond the range where Allied tanks could even hope to return fire. Its armor, over 100 millimeters thick on the frontal plates, turned back most anti-tank rounds the Allies could throw at it. Allied tankers developed what intelligence officers grimly termed Tiger fever, a psychological phenomenon where crews reported every German tank they encountered as a Tiger, such was the terror this machine inspired. A single Tiger battalion could hold up entire Allied divisions, extracting devastating tolls before withdrawing or being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But by May 1945, those days were over. As German forces collapsed in the final weeks of the war, Tiger crews faced impossible choices. Fuel had become so scarce that tanks ran dry within miles of their objectives. Replacement parts were non-existent. Experienced crews had been eliminated or captured, faced with advancing Allied armies from the west and Soviet forces from the east. German tankers followed standing orders. Destroy your vehicle to prevent capture. Crews placed explosive charges inside turrets, detonated ammunition stores, or simply abandoned their machines after draining fluids and smashing critical components. The roads of Germany became a graveyard of burned-out armor. Allied reconnaissance teams moving through liberated territory catalogued hundreds of abandoned Tigers, some barely damaged, others reduced to skeletal hulks. The scale was staggering. An entire generation of Germany's most sophisticated weapon lay scattered across Europe like the ruins of a fallen empire. But not all Tigers were destroyed. For the victorious Allies, these machines represented intelligence gold, technological secrets that could revolutionize their own tank programs, or, more urgently, prevent future surprises. By late April 1945, even before the formal surrender, American, British, and Soviet intelligence teams were racing across Germany with a single mission: capture intact Tigers before anyone else could. The competition was fierce. U.S. Army ordnance officers scoured battlefields in Belgium and France, searching for any Tiger that could be recovered and shipped back to the United States. British technical intelligence teams, who had been studying the Tiger since the capture of the legendary Tiger 131 in Tunisia 2 years earlier, sought additional examples to expand their understanding of German engineering. But it was the Soviet Union, having suffered the worst of the Tiger's fury on the Eastern Front, that pursued German armor with the greatest urgency. The Red Army had first encountered Tigers in January 1943 during the battles to break the siege of Leningrad. The experience had been catastrophic. Soviet tanks, even the formidable T-34, found themselves outmatched at every range. Within days of that first encounter, Soviet forces captured 2 damaged but largely intact Tigers, turret numbers 100 and 121, and immediately transported them to the proving grounds at Kubinka, outside Moscow. There, Soviet engineers methodically disassembled every component, test-fired captured ammunition against Soviet armor, and compiled exhaustive reports on German metallurgy, optics, and fire control systems. The Kubinka tests revealed uncomfortable truths. The Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate the frontal armor of any Soviet tank from over a mile away, while Soviet guns required dangerously close approaches, often within 300 meters, to have any chance of a disabling shot. This intelligence directly influenced the development of heavier Soviet guns and the IS-2 heavy tank, a direct response to the Tiger threat. Now, in the spring of 1945, the race was on to capture the even more advanced Tiger II, the so-called King Tiger. In August 1944, Soviet forces near Sandomierz had already captured 3 operational King Tigers during fierce fighting. The tanks, each weighing nearly 70 tons and mounting an even longer 88mm gun, were immediately sent to Kubinka. During the transfer, the captured machines demonstrated the very weaknesses that had plagued them in combat. Engines overheated under the summer sun, gearboxes failed from the immense strain, and cooling systems proved inadequate. Soviet testers documented everything: armor quality, welding techniques, the tendency for interior spalling even when rounds failed to penetrate. They discovered that while the King Tiger's frontal armor was theoretically impervious to most Soviet guns, the quality of German steel had declined as the war dragged on. Vanadium had replaced molybdenum in the armor plates, a substitution born of desperation, and it made the armor more brittle. Even non-penetrating hits could send lethal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment. British intelligence, meanwhile, focused on operational Tigers still in Europe. Teams from the Royal Armoured Corps' technical branch moved through France and Belgium, identifying abandoned King Tigers from the Battle of the Bulge and the Normandy campaign. One particular prize, a Tiger II numbered 332 from Kampfgruppe Peiper, was discovered near Petit Coup, Belgium. The 70-ton behemoth had been abandoned after running out of fuel during the desperate German offensive in December 1944. American recovery crews found the tank could still move under its own power, a testament to German engineering even in defeat. They drove it to Spa, and from there it began a long journey that would eventually take it to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where U.S. Army engineers would spend years dissecting its secrets. The United States also secured another significant prize from Tunisia, Tiger 712, captured in May 1943. This tank had seen extensive combat service, far more than the famous Tiger 131, having been in action since December 1942. American troops partially disassembled the 57-ton machine for shipment across the Atlantic, then reassembled it at Aberdeen for mobility trials, ballistics testing, and training films. Soldiers walked through its cramped interior, noting the austere crew conditions, what Allied testers politely termed uncomfortable and Spartan. The driver and radio operator sat crammed in the forward hull. The turret crew worked in a space barely 62 inches tall, and the entire machine reeked of diesel, gun oil, and the accumulated sweat of combat. Yet the engineering was undeniably sophisticated. The Tiger's Maybach engine, its precision optics, its hydraulically assisted steering, all represented capabilities the Allies had not fully matched. Back in Britain, the captured Tiger 131 had already become the most studied tank in Allied intelligence. Shipped from Tunisia to England in 1943, it had toured British cities as part of war bond drives before being sent to the testing grounds at Chobham. British engineers compiled hundreds of pages of technical reports, photographing every component, measuring every armor plate, test-firing its gun at various ranges. The reports were revealing but also disorganized. Sections were left unfinished as engineers were pulled away for more urgent work preparing for D-Day. Some components were analyzed multiple times, while others, like mobility systems, were never fully studied because the engine broke during testing and was never repaired. By late 1944, with Allied tanks now equipped with guns capable of defeating Tigers, the intelligence value diminished. The war was moving on, but the most valuable intelligence wasn't just about how the Tiger worked. It was about what it revealed about German priorities and the flaws in their strategic thinking. The Tiger had cost over twice as much as a Panzer IV and 4 times as much as a Stuggy III assault gun. Each King Tiger required 300,000 man-hours to build, an astronomical investment of labor that Germany, by 1944, could not afford. While the Americans were producing 40,000 Shermans and the Soviets 50,000 T-34s, Germany managed just 1,300 Tiger IIs and 492 King Tigers. The Allies learned that Germany had sacrificed quantity for quality to a suicidal degree. Every Tiger was a masterpiece of over-engineering that couldn't be produced fast enough, maintained easily enough, or fielded in sufficient numbers to change the war's outcome. This lesson that perfect tanks mattered less than good enough tanks you could build by the thousands would shape post-war military procurement for decades. By the summer of 1945, the intelligence phase was ending. The victors had learned what they needed. Now came the question of what to do with the hundreds of Tigers still scattered across Europe. Most were wrecks, of course, burned-out hulls or machines too damaged to be worth recovering. But dozens of largely intact examples remained, hulking reminders of Germany's ambitions. The decision was made quickly. They would be destroyed, not through neglect or abandonment, but through a deliberate campaign of elimination that would ensure these machines never threatened Allied forces again. The logistics were staggering. Tigers and King Tigers were not easily moved. At 60 to 70 tons, they required specialized heavy recovery vehicles, most of which belonged to the very armies that had just finished defeating them. Some tanks were towed to collection points by American M26 Pershings or British Churchills, straining the recovery vehicles to their mechanical limits. Others were simply too remote or too damaged to be worth the effort. Throughout Germany, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, Allied engineers began the systematic demolition of captured German armor. Explosive charges were placed inside turrets, detonated to blow the hatches off and render the machines permanently inoperable. Cutting torches sliced through gun barrels and turret rings. Bulldozers pushed hulks into rivers or buried them in mass graves of scrap metal. The British, who had accumulated the most Tigers during the final campaigns, established collection points in occupied Germany where captured vehicles were catalogued, stripped of useful components, and then destroyed. The Americans did the same, though they retained a handful of the most intact examples for museum preservation and continued testing. But the Soviets took a different approach. At Kubinka, the dozens of captured Tigers, both Model Is and EOIs, were put to use as targets for new Soviet anti-tank weapons. Veterans of the proving grounds recalled that throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s, captured German tanks stood in testing ranges, absorbing hits from increasingly powerful Soviet guns. When the tests concluded, most were sent to scrap yards and melted down. A few survived only because they were too shot up or too historically significant to destroy. By 1950, the Great Purge was nearly complete. Of the 1,347 Tiger is built, perhaps a dozen remained intact. Of the 492 King Tigers, even fewer survived. The rest had been reduced to scrap metal, their steel recycled into the infrastructure of a rebuilding Europe. The most feared tank of World War II had been systematically erased from existence. Yet a few escaped destruction. Tiger 131, the first complete Tiger captured by British forces in Tunisia, had earned a reprieve through its intelligence value. By September 1951, the British Ministry of Supply officially handed it over to the Bovington Tank Museum, where it would spend the next 4 decades on static display. In June 1990, museum staff began an ambitious restoration project. Working with the Army Base Repair Organization, they completely disassembled the tank, installed a working Maybach engine salvaged from a Tiger II, and fitted a modern fire suppression system. In December 2003, Tiger 131 returned to the museum floor, and then, for the first time in over 60 years, it moved. The restoration was so complete that in 2014, the tank appeared in the Hollywood film Fury, marking the first time an original, fully operational Tiger had been used in a movie since the Second World War. Today, it remains the only running Tiger-I in existence, a 60-ton time capsule that still starts, drives, and rotates its turret as it did in 1943. Tiger 712, the American prize from Tunisia, followed a different path. After years of testing at Aberdeen, it was placed on outdoor display where decades of weather took their toll. In the late 1940s, engineers cut open the left side for instructional purposes, permanently altering the vehicle. Eventually, it was moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, where ongoing restoration efforts continue. It will never run again, but it stands as a testament to American ordnance recovery efforts. In France, a different Tiger story unfolded. As German forces retreated through Normandy in August 1944, a Tiger I from the 102nd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion broke down in the village of Vimoutiers. The crew abandoned it in a roadside ditch, where it remained for 30 years. A local scrap dealer purchased the tank, but, finding it too heavy to move economically, removed only easily accessible parts. The turret stayed, the hull stayed, and slowly the Tiger became a local landmark, rusting quietly as French children played around it and tourists stopped to take photographs. In 1975, when a new scrap dealer attempted to finish the job, the townspeople of Vimoutiers intervened. They purchased the tank for 6,000 francs and placed it on permanent display. Today, it remains there, battered, exposed to the elements, but preserved as an historical monument. It is one of the few Tigers still standing where it fell. The French also secured operational examples. After the liberation, French forces scoured the countryside for abandoned German vehicles, rebuilding whatever could still move. Several captured Tigers were integrated into French Army units, serving briefly in the immediate post-war period before being retired. One of these, a Tiger Amai that had belonged to the SS, was eventually transferred to the Musée des Blindés at Saumur, where it underwent restoration. More remarkably, the French captured and restored a King Tiger, turret number 300. This 70-ton giant, abandoned by its crew near Bruay-en-Vexin in August 1944, became the only fully operational Tiger II in the world. Restored to running condition by French Army technicians, it now performs in the annual carousel demonstrations at Saumur, its massive engine roaring to life each summer before crowds of thousands. In Russia, the Kubinka Tank Museum houses a Tiger I that survived the test ranges, one of the original machines captured during the Leningrad battles. It sits alongside the King Tiger captured at Oglendov in 1944. Turret number 502. Both are indoor exhibits now, preserved behind glass, their steel bearing the scars of 80 years. Another Tiger stands outdoors at the Military Historical Museum of Leninos Negiri. its hull riddled with test holes from decades of use as a firing range target. It survived only because it was too damaged to scrap. Across the Atlantic, the United States preserved one final example: the King Tiger captured during the Battle of the Bulge. After decades at Aberdeen, it was transferred to Fort Knox's Patton Museum in 1991, and later to the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Benning. Its left side remains cut open from Cold War-era instructional demonstrations, a permanent window into the machine's complex interior. In total, only 7 Tiger IIs and 6 King Tigers survive today, 13 machines out of nearly 1,800 built. The rest are gone, reduced to memory and scrap. But the Tiger's influence extended far beyond the few examples that survived. The tank had fundamentally changed Allied thinking about armored warfare. Before encountering Tigers in North Africa and Russia, American and British planners had assumed their Sherman and Cromwell tanks were adequate. The Tiger shattered that assumption. It demonstrated that armor thickness, gun caliber, and long-range firepower could dominate a battlefield in ways the Allies hadn't imagined. The response was immediate. Britain rushed development of the 17-pounder anti-tank gun and the Firefly tank. America accelerated work on the 76mm gun and the M26 Pershing, and the Soviets designed the IS-2 heavy tank specifically to counter the Tiger threat. More importantly, the Tiger taught the Allies what not to build. The King Tiger, despite its fearsome capabilities, proved to be a strategic dead end. Its 70-ton weight made it a logistical nightmare. Its complex drivetrain broke down constantly, especially when driven by undertrained crews. Its fuel consumption was so prodigious that German forces lost more King Tigers to fuel starvation than to enemy action. And its production cost meant that for every King Tiger Germany built, the Soviets could field 6 IS-2s and the Americans could produce 20 Shermans. Post-war military strategists looked at the Tiger program and saw a cautionary tale about the dangers of perfectionism in wartime production. The lesson stuck. After 1945, major armies abandoned the concept of specialized heavy tanks in favor of main battle tanks, machines that combined the firepower and armor of heavy tanks with the mobility and reliability of medium tanks. The British Centurion, introduced just as the war ended, embodied this philosophy. It was heavily armed and well protected, but weighed only 45 tons, making it far more mobile than a King Tiger, while still capable of defeating one in combat. The Soviet T-54 followed similar principles, as did America's later M48 Patton. These main battle tanks dominated the Cold War battlefield, not because they were invincible, but because they struck the right balance between capability and practicality, the very balance the Tiger had failed to achieve. Yet the Tiger's technological innovations lived on. Its advanced optics, its sophisticated fire control systems, its emphasis on crew survivability, these features became standard in post-war tank design. The Tiger had demonstrated what was possible, even if it had also demonstrated the limits of over-engineering. Soviet engineers who had studied captured Tigers at Kubinka incorporated lessons about turret design, armor layout, and gun stabilization into their next generation of vehicles. British designers drew on Tiger suspension concepts when developing the Centurion. American ordnance officers, having dissected Tiger 712 at Aberdeen, applied German engineering principles to their own emerging tank programs. Perhaps most significantly, the Tiger created a psychological legacy that endures to this day. It established the archetype of the supertank, a nearly invincible machine that dominated through sheer superiority rather than numbers. This image, amplified by German propaganda and sustained by Allied veterans' accounts, has made the Tiger one of the most recognized military vehicles in history. Museums that display tigers draw enormous crowds. Books and documentaries about the tank proliferate. Video games and films continue to portray it as the ultimate weapon. The Tiger has become, in the decades since the war, more famous in memory than it ever was on the battlefield. And beneath the North Atlantic, off the coast of northwest Ireland, lies an even larger memorial. There, in the same waters where dozens of German U-boats were deliberately sunk during Operation Deadlight, scattered wrecks of German armor occasionally appear in sonar surveys. During the immediate post-war cleanup, some Tigers and King Tigers proved too difficult or too dangerous to demolish on land. They were loaded onto barges, towed out to sea, and sent to the bottom. These underwater graveyards remain largely unexplored, their locations marked only on old Royal Navy charts. The cold Atlantic has preserved them in near-perfect condition, silent monuments to Germany's armored ambitions. Today, the few surviving Tigers serve a different purpose. They stand in museums not as weapons, but as artifacts of a vanished age, reminders of the costs of war, the limits of technological solutions to strategic problems, and the human beings who fought inside these steel machines. Over 30,000 German tank crewmen never returned from the war. Countless Allied soldiers fell to Tiger guns. The machines that once symbolized invincibility now represent loss, remembrance, and the hard-earned wisdom that perfect weapons do not win wars. Logistics, production, and the courage of ordinary soldiers do. The Tiger tanks are gone, but they left behind a legacy that still shapes armored warfare, still haunts the imaginations of military historians, and still stands in a handful of museums and one rusting monument in a French village, as testimony to the empire of steel that fought, failed, and now rests in silence between history and memory. If you found this story fascinating, you'll love our video on what happened to Germany's Messerschmitt fighters after the war. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the untold stories of the Second World War.